Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get into it. So, hi. Hope you all had a great week. We're gonna talk about limitations of both pilot and plane today. So we'll be covering lots of things. We're gonna be covering weight and balance, takeoff landing performance, aerodynamics, human factors, pilot errors that we can make. And I think that is it. But it doesn't sound like a lot, but each topic has a lot of material. And as we get into aerodynamics, I'm going to try to keep it as basic as possible. Just know that there's probably more to talk about with aero. But I could do like a 3-hour session just on aerodynamics by itself. So we're going to do just the basic things that you should know for the foundation, like the theories of lift, the 4 forces of flight, center of gravity, things like that, angle of attack. So we'll try to keep it confined. But yeah, so without further ado, I'll start a little slower so she has time. Does anyone else need to use the restroom before we dive in? Okay. I'll just wait. Any questions so far? Okay, figured not. But you guys got the WhatsApp message that the ACS changed starting yesterday, effective yesterday. So the new ACS will be what you would be tested on, unless it changes again before your check ride, which I doubt, because the last change was like 5 years ago. Not a whole lot has changed in terms of like your maneuvers or anything. Like the standards are all the same. They did add some risk management elements and some skills elements into each section, and some of those updates were necessary in terms of like it's 2024, we're using technology now. So for example, I think on the cross country planning they added that you can use a computer generated flight navigation log. That wasn't in there before. Everything was expected to be done by hand on paper with a paper chart. That being said, you're still going to get taught that, how to do that. But now the DPE, designated pilot examiner, can't really argue against it. Yeah, which is because it's on there now. Now it says it's acceptable. Yeah, some examiners, and here's the thing, is you'll find with check rides is the examiners are not allowed to stray from the ACS, but they all approach it differently. So Sandra and I were talking about it earlier. Some examiners, they'll focus on the questions you missed on your written for the oral during your check ride, and that's it. And it'll be like an hour, 2 hours, depending on how many questions you missed. Some examiners, what doesn't matter what you missed, they're going to cover everything. So that's the guy I had for my private pilot. My oral was 5 hours. So that's Ken Cobb out of Columbia. Don't go to Columbia. Don't take him unless, if you want to feel like you truly earned it, go ahead, be my guest. But usually the examiners here that we use are Mark Montague. Girls Love to Fly works with Mark a lot. We also have Dave Tranquilla. Yeah, Dave Tranquilla. They both operate primarily out of Auburn, but Mark at least will make an exception and come down to McClellan once in a while. Mark is a little bit more thorough. He'll definitely focus on like the areas that you missed, but he has certain questions that he likes to throw in there regardless, which they're still part of the ACS, so he's allowed to do that. But it's not going to be a 5-hour oral. I'll just put it that way. Usually with Mark, it'd be like 2 to 3 hours. Okay, so performance limitations for your airplane. There's a couple things that specifically affect your airplane. One would be the atmosphere. So we're talking density, altitude, and weather, of course. Density altitude is the altitude your airplane thinks it's flying at. So you might be at elevation of 77 at McClellan, but if it's hot outside, the plane density altitude might be at 2,000 feet. So the plane will perform as if it were at 2,000 feet, not at sea level. Density altitude affects your airplane in 3 ways. You get less lift from your wings, you get less thrust from your propeller, and you get less engine power from your engine because the air is less dense because it's hotter. So those are the 3 ways. So less thrust, less lift, less engine power. Pilot technique, of course, you're going to get your private pilot. You're going to have probably, depends on the person, but you're going to be new. And your level of experience and comfort is going to be limited. And so when you take the numbers, the performance numbers in the pilot operating handbook, those numbers were performed by a professional test pilot under ideal conditions, knowing exactly what he or she was going to do that day. That's not you. So when it comes to calculating these numbers, we always add a buffer. We always act conservatively because we're not in perfect conditions. This is not a brand new airplane or a brand new engine, and we're not test pilots. So we don't take those numbers just at a glance. We usually add to them a little bit. And then configuration, flaps and landing gear specifically. So if I say, configure for landing, usually means to, extend the flaps. If you have a retractable gear, which we don't, you would extend it though. Flaps and landing gear add drag to the plane. Flaps at 10 degrees adds more lift than it does drag. But once you get into like 20 degrees of flaps, then that's when the drag outweighs the lift. Flaps also decrease your stall speed. That's a big reason why we use them for landing, because you're maneuvering the airplane. You want to slow down to touch down, safely. But as you're maneuvering slowly, you get closer to the stall speed. So when you add flaps, that stall speed decreases. So now you have a bigger margin between your operating speed and the stall speed. Once those two get closer together, things get squirrely. So adding flaps widens that margin again, keeps us safe. Also helps us get down. Airport environment. I would say airport environment and pilot technique kind of go hand in hand, because you can have a fantastic pilot technique out of McClellan, but if you try to take off out of Auburn, which is a significantly shorter and narrower runway surrounded by terrain, it's not flat, your technique at McClellan is not going to work for Auburn. So terrain, obstacles, runway surface, those all matter when you're calculating takeoff and landing performance, because they all affect the performance of the plane, and they call forth a different type of technique from you depending on where you're at. So for example, out of Auburn, I turn my base leg sooner than I would at McClellan, because if I turn too far away out of Auburn, it's surrounded by hills. If I lost an engine farther out, I'm not going to make it to Auburn. If I lost an engine farther out of McClellan, I could still probably make the runway, or at the very least, there's a lot more flat ground around McClellan, not so much Auburn. There's really not many choices. So I keep my traffic pattern a lot tighter out of Auburn. That being said, I have over 1,000 hours. I'm not expecting you guys to go solo at McClellan and then be able to solo out of Auburn. That's an entirely different training technique. So that being said, you should all go to Auburn a couple times. Questions? Good? Okay. Yeah.
Is it always 10%, or is that just like for Cessnas or standard?
I would say for like single engine piston, 10 degrees of flaps adds more lift than drag. For like a Boeing, I have no idea. Yeah. And I think also, depending on the airplane, your first notch of flaps, when you get in larger airplanes, instead of 10 degrees, the first notch is actually 15, so a little different. Okay, so weight and balance, huge. We are trying to stay within an envelope of safety. For the Cessna 150 specifically, this is our envelope. We need to operate somewhere inside these boundaries. If we're outside, you don't go. Or you need to fix something. You need to take some weight out, whether it be bags, whether it be you have too much fuel for you and your passenger, kick your passenger out, I don't know. Say, sorry, not today. Or you need to shift weight around. You could be within the weight limits. You could be at 1,500 pounds, max is 1,600, but maybe you have too much weight too far forward or too far backward, and it puts you outside the envelope anyway. So then you got to shift something. So for reference, I would rather, for stability, or not for stability, yeah, for stability and for safety, I would rather have a more forward CG. I'm not saying like outside the envelope, but in the envelope, I'd rather have a more forward CG if you want to be more stable with like in a training environment, because when you have a nose that's heavier, the airplane's more stable. By more stable, I mean it will recover from a stall a lot easier than if you had too much weight in the back or an aft CG. Now you have a heavier tail. It's going to be harder to get that nose down if you were to stall the plane. So forward CG is more stable. Aft CG, less stable but more fuel efficient. So you have pros and cons for both. If I'm flying by myself or, with a loved one, I'm going on a cross country, then I might want a more aft CG because I'm trying to not burn so much fuel. The reason why is because the nose is the heaviest part of the plane, and the horizontal stabilizer, that little wing on the back of the plane, generates a tail down moment, meaning that if this is the tail and this is the nose, the tail balances the nose because the horizontal stabilizer is actually like an upside down wing. I tried my best to draw it. It generates lift going down. So it keeps the nose from just dipping all the time. When you have more weight in the back, you need less tail down moment for the same effect. So it just helps. So you don't have to have as high of an RPM setting, therefore you don't have to burn as much fuel. So aft CG, not as stable, but more fuel efficient. So we're gonna learn how to do weight and balance today. So we're gonna run through this and then I'll tell you how I got the arms. So what this means, item, BEW is the basic empty weight of the plane. Remember first lesson, all planes have a basic empty weight. They are weighed without any usable fuel in there, without any passengers, without any cargo. They're weighed with the frame, the carpet, the chairs, and any unusable fuel in there. Unusable fuel basically means the fuel that can't be drained, can't really be used in every situation just because of where the fuel tanks are located and where the tube is located that draws the fuel. Sometimes that fuel sits below, like if the tube is here, sometimes the fuel sits down here. It just can't get into the tube, so you have something called unusable fuel. So we don't count that for performance. If you're calculating fuel burn, you're only using usable fuel. You don't care about the unusable fuel, you don't factor that in. So basic empty weight is with no usable fuel. Obviously you have pilot, passenger. In this case, in the 150, your passenger is probably your CFI. You got bags in the back, you have fuel like we talked about, usable fuel, and then you have your oil. In newer airplanes, usually the oil is included in the basic empty weight, but in this one it's not. I don't know why they did it that way, but it is separate for this one. So you have three things. You have weight, arm, and moment. Weight is the weight of the item in pounds. Arm is the distance from the standard datum plane that the object is. So the standard datum plane is basically just a baseline that we compare all of the items from distance-wise. So like in the 150 and like in the Piper Cherokee, the standard datum plane is pretty much the firewall, which is just right behind the panel that you guys are facing. So just think of the panel. Panel's here, I'm sitting here, I'm about, I don't know, in this plane, I'm 39 inches away from the firewall. So that's the arm, is how far am I from the panel. The seats in the back, in the Piper, are even farther. They're like 60-something inches away from the panel. And then you have the baggage area. In the 150, we don't have seats in the back. We just have the two seats, then we have the baggage area. So we're comparing the distance from the firewall. Anything aft of the firewall will be a positive number. Anything forward of the firewall towards the engine is a negative number. That's why oil is negative. Yes?
How are they calculating how far away like the entire plane is from that? Because it's 32.44, like that's the whole plane, no?
That's the center of gravity.
Okay.
But we are using that as the arm to get the moment for the empty weight of the plane. Because what we'll do is we're going to do that times that times that, so on and so forth, get the moment. We're going to add all of these moments together and divide them by the total weight. So weight times arm equals moment. You only need 2 out of the 3 to figure out the whole equation. Because it's like if you know, in algebra, basic arithmetic, you can rearrange this formula to find whatever you're missing. So if I was missing the arm, I would just do but I had the moment and the weight, I would divide the moment by the weight to get the arm for that specific item. Good? With me? Okay. Who wants to be the example? Who wants to be the pilot in this scenario? I have to ask you how much you weigh. 165. 165. Who wants to be the passenger? 104. All right, bags. We'll pretend we have 30 pounds of bags in the back. Fuel, every gallon weighs about 6 pounds. So total usable fuel in the 150 is 22 and a half. So 22 and a half times 6, I believe, is 135. And that's just because I've done it a lot. But if you want to double check, please do. Perfect. 135. And then I can't remember how much the oil weighs, but I have it written down. It's supposed to be like 11 or 12 pounds. 11 pounds. We can carry, and this is just assuming full oil. Okay, 11 pounds of oil, 135 pounds of fuel, 30 of bags, 104 passenger, 165 pilot. Basic empty weight is 1,119.8. That number is on a weight and balance sheet that's in the airplane, and it always has to be in the airplane. So is the center of gravity, and so is the moment. So if someone would like to help me calculate this, that'd be great. 36,326? Yeah. Okay, 165 times 39. 6,455. Okay, 104 times 39. 4,056. Okay. And 30, oh good. 1,935. All right. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So if somebody wants to volunteer to add up all the weight, and then someone could add up all the moment, and just let me know. Three, 1, 2. Okay. That's what. Perfect. Okay. We're now going to divide 54,323.312 divided by 1,564.8. I think this one had a decimal. I just couldn't fit it. 34.72. Okay, so that's our center of gravity. Center of gravity is where all the weight is concentrated in the plane. Think of it as the pivot point of the plane, like on a seesaw. The middle of a seesaw is the pivot point. Center of gravity is your pivot point. So 34.72, we're at 1564, call that 1,600 pounds. So we're going to take the moment, which is 54,000. So it's like right before the 55. And we'll just go all the way up to 1,600. Yeah, we're in the envelope. We're just above. Yeah, I ran it up to 1,600, but there is a 1,550, so I could also just go up to the 1,550 or roughly around there, maybe a little bit higher, like right here. So we are within the envelope, though. I want to note that most POHs now for like a newer airplane, on the bottom, it's usually center of gravity down here, and then the weight's over here. On this one, they use the moment divided by 1,000. So just, if you, it's a smaller airplane. So if you go to different, fly bigger airplanes, just be aware that usually its center of gravity is on that axis. But okay, cool. We are good to go in this situation. We're in the envelope, we're below 1,600 pounds, or we're not above 1,600 pounds, I should say. How I got these numbers. So usually in the POH, it'll actually have all the arms listed for you, but we have a very old airplane with a very poorly written POH. So it doesn't do that. However, it does give you the information to find that out. And I just want you to know how to do it in case you come across something like this again. So this is the entire weight and balance page. As you can see, it does not give me any of the arms, but it does give me a sample problem, and it gives me the weight and the moment divided by 1,000. So how I found it out was, there's the moment, 34.1, times it by 1,000 to get the full number, I don't know, 34,100, divide it by the sample weight, 1038, and then I got a moment for that, which I guess that one doesn't matter because that's like the old empty weight. But like, for example, for the fuel at 22.5, 5,700 divided by 135, I got around 42 inches. That's how I found all the arms. The arm for our new empty weight, that's on the sheet of paper in the plane, so you can actually ignore number 1. But everything else, like for the bags, 4,900 divided by 76, I got 64.5. Yes.
I was always wondering, because I see people rounding, is there like a standard way that you round sometimes?
Usually I round up. Yeah. You can be as precise as you want, though. It's just whatever the calculator is. If it's like 0.39, I'm like, okay, 0.4. And ForeFlight does the same thing. They also round up with everything. So like, I think if you put the empty weight on ForeFlight, mine says 1,120 because it's 1,119.8. So ForeFlight's just like, okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. That doesn't make sense to me.
It was inconsistent.
Right, totally. I would round up. So does that make sense how I got the arms? Okay, because it's, we're doing a lot of math at the same time. So I don't want to just spoon feed you the numbers. I want you to be able to, like, if you lose your notes from today, I want you to be able to go back and be like, oh, that's right, she told me if I take this times 1,000, get the full number divided by the sample weight, it'll still give you the same arm. The arms don't change. The moment and the weight does. And just for reference, I know the pilot passenger seats move back and forth. 39 inches is just the average. That's usually what we just default to, is 39 inches. I do the same thing in a 172, and those POHs are a lot nicer, and they'll give you like the actual range of like the distance. You can just use the average, because like I'm not going to go out there and get a ruler and be like, I sit all the way to the front, so like how far is that? If anything, I use the closest distance, but some people, they sit right in the middle. I'm not doing that. Average is fine. Cool. Weight and balance is done. Got notes on this? Comfortable with this? Okay. All right, 4 forces of flight. You have lift, weight, thrust, and drag. All of these forces work together to determine what the airplane's going to do. And straight and level is when all of these forces are acting in equilibrium. When you start climbing and descending, that's when they become one's acting more than the other. So for example, if I add more power, I'm increasing thrust. So I have more thrust than I do drag. If I increase my pitch, I'm generating more lift to counteract the weight. And all of these have something called a vector. Think of a vector, it's just an imaginary line that acts in a certain direction at a given strength. So if we're talking about the lift vector, if we're straight and level, lift acts straight up. Gravity, its vector, or gravity or weight, they can be used interchangeably. Weight acts straight down, thrust acts forward, and then drag acts backwards. So the opposite of thrust would be drag, opposite of lift would be weight, and vice versa. So Talking about lift first. Lift acts through something called the center of pressure. You could also call it the center of lift. Think of the center of lift as just where all of the forces of lift are concentrated, similar to like center of gravity is where all the weight is concentrated. You always want the center of lift. Center of lift should always be behind center of gravity. That's just the way the plane is built. And because if it was too far forward, you would have the issue of the nose wanting to pitch up. And to the point where you could probably correct for it in certain situations. But like in a landing situation, that might be not a great thing because if the nose lifts up too much, it might stall before you have a chance to correct it. So center of pressure is always behind center of gravity. There's something else I wanted to go off of with that. There's two important principles when you're generating lift. So you can generate lift by increasing your angle of attack. I will get into angle of attack in a little bit. Basically, I mean, you're pulling back on the yoke. So you increase angle of attack, you generate lift. As you generate lift, you're also generating a downward force on the tail, like we talked about earlier. That's kind of an equal opposite reaction, Newton's third law. We're going to get into that, so just keep that in mind. So increased angle of attack increases lift, also increases tail down force on the tail. And that helps create that nose down moment, so the plane's not just flipping over. The aircraft's always going to rotate around the center of gravity. And then the lift vector acts in a 90-degree angle from the relative airflow. So what I mean is if you're going straight, the airflow is coming this way, so that means lift's coming that way. If I'm climbing, relative airflow is now a little bit more at an angle, so my lift vector will also shift. That's where you get drag. If you generate lift, you're generating drag, always. Now we talk about weight, centered around the center of gravity. That's also the pivot point of the plane, the opposing force of lift. The vector is always going to act towards the Earth. That's just a given. That's just physics. I think that's all I wanted to say. There's not much to talk about weight. Things that change weight, obviously, if you add more weight to the plane. Things that affect lift would be like air density, altitude, airspeed. Usually more airspeed. Well, more airspeed with a higher angle of attack would generate more lift. Wing size, bigger wings generate more lift than a smaller wing. There's also different shapes of wings. Don't ask me what they all are, but there are different shapes. Just take my word for it. We talked about air density. Yeah, airspeed, angle of attack, wing size, air density all affect lift. And then you have thrust, which is pretty much still lift, but it's forward. It's going forward. So you think about lift, or you think about thrust as forward lift because the wing and the propeller are something called airfoils. So they manipulate the air around them to generate lift. Propellers just generate it horizontally. So both the propeller and the wing are airfoils. So thrust, the opposite force is drag. Things that affect thrust are the same, pretty much the same things that affect lift with the addition of increasing your RPMs. If you add more throttle, you get more RPMs, you get more thrust. And if you're getting more of something, think of it as you're just extending the vector. So like if I add more throttle, I'm extending the thrust vector, for example. And then you have drag. If you generate lift, you're generating drag. Just a given. That's called induced drag. There's two main forms of drag. There's induced drag, which is just generated if you generate lift. And then there's parasite drag, which is just generated by an object moving through the air. There's different types of parasite drag. I won't go so far into them, but I'll name them. There's skin friction drag, there's form drag, and there's interference drag. I'm gonna let you guys look those up. That'll be your homework. Look up different types of parasite drag. Things that affect drag, same thing, air density. So air density, if you have less dense air, that negatively affects lift but positively affects drag. So you have less drag when it's hot outside. So higher density altitude, less lift, less drag. Which kind of makes sense because they're related. Airspeed affects your drag. The faster you move, the more drag you have. That's a result of parasite drag. So an aircraft on the ground, not moving, is not generating any drag because it's not moving and it's not climbing. Drag acts opposite of thrust, so it pulls us backwards. And then once again, as you tilt the plane up, lift vector also goes backwards, which increases drag as well. That's that induced drag we was talking about. Good? Cool. Questions? Mm-hmm.
I sometimes get confused about
Yeah.
like it being on which axes.
Yes. That's a good topic to bring up. Where's the other cat?
Some questions worded weird.
Yeah.
But it would be just the weight and the lift would be on the.
So vertical axis, that is just going straight from the sky down to the ground. You have the lateral axis, which is from wingtip to wingtip. Longitudinals from tail to nose. We're mostly, when it comes to what we're talking about with the axes, is we're just talking about how the plane's pivoting for the control surface that you're manipulating. So if I'm moving up and down, I'm pivoting about the lateral axis. If I'm on the rudders, I'm swinging the nose, that's vertical axis. And then if I'm banking, that's the longitudinal axis. So it's really just like the axis you're pivoting around. And all of these axes meet in the center of gravity. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, density altitude was that for me. Density altitude was that. Bernoulli's principle was that for me, which we're going to talk about. Yeah, right? Okay, so you got two theories of lift. You actually have a lot more than two, but these are the two correct ones. So ignore everybody else. They're liars. So you got two theories of lift. You have Bernoulli's principle, which is basically, he's a fluid dynamicist, but air works the same way as fluid. So we take his principle and we apply it to aviation. So if there is a fluid or air that speeds up, there's a simultaneous drop in pressure. And then for Newton, we're using his third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So whenever you're thinking of aerodynamics, or just like the movement of air, think about how water moves. When you have a stream with a bunch of rocks, you notice that when the water goes through the two rocks, it speeds up. Air works the same way. So if air is going through a tube, if it's a small tube, the random motion of the air molecules gets concentrated and that energy gets translated to forward energy. So it starts speeding up. As it speeds up, there's a drop in pressure. This is important because the air speeds up on top of the wing, on top of the airfoil. So this shape is called camber. We're basically just talking about the curvature of the wing. So if I'm approaching, if the Cessna is parked like this, and I'm approaching it from this perspective, the shape of the wing relatively resembles the camber, this shape that I drew several times. The air flowing on top of the curvature of the wing moves faster, relatively faster than the air on the bottom. And you're going to hear, like, some people explain it because they'll be like, well, if you have air moving from the top of the wing and the bottom of the wing, there's more distance for this one to travel because there's a curve, and they have to have equal transit time and meet. That's a lie. No, they don't. The air molecules are not friends. They don't have to meet up in the same spot at the same time. It's weird. So if you hear that, if you read that, it's not true. The reason why it's like speeding up, and you'll hear different theories. The most common one is because With the curvature, what it's doing is it's presenting a downward motion for the air. So that's where the air accelerates because it has a downward curvature to go down. So as the air speeds up on top, pressure decreases. You have high pressure down here, lower pressure up here. With low pressure, you get a vacuum kind of phenomenon. So Bernoulli's basically saying the airplane is being sucked up into the air, and that's what generates lift. And he's not wrong, but he's also not the only one that's right. So you have the suction theory. The air is like a vacuum. That's how the airplane lifts. Then you have Newton, whose every action there's an equal opposite reaction. And basically he's saying as the air flows over the wing, it produces a downwash. With the downward force, there must be an equal and opposite upward force that pushes us up. So you have that theory as well. They're both correct in different ways. And I'm going to do something that you guys might have seen, like, I don't know, in middle school science class. But the ping pong ball and the hair dryer sound familiar? You've seen it? Okay, well then this isn't that exciting for you, but this is very exciting. What do we think is happening? I know! Wait, I want to film this on my phone too, because like, I think it's the coolest thing. Like when I first saw it, I was like, what? It's so funny. Oh God, okay. But what do you guys think is happening? Why is the ball floating? Just because I have air blasting it up?
There's more lift and drag, right? So it's the way the air, yeah.
The weight?
The weight of the ball is less than like the pressure that's coming out of the hair dryer.
You're on the right track when you say pressure. So remember we talked about faster moving air is lower pressure? So you have a fast stream of air coming from the hair dryer, right? So this entire little column of air is low pressure. The air outside of it is high pressure. So there's like a little parcel of air that's lower pressure that's allowing the ball to float. But then you still have, so that's Bernoulli. Exactly. So you have the high pressure, relatively high pressure, that's around this little column of hair dryer air that is keeping the ball like it's floating. So it's not, the ball is not just continuing to lift. It's floating because you have the high pressure and the low pressure pushing against each other. So what I could do is right now I'll let it stabilize. I could increase the high pressure by coming down with my hand, forcing the ball to only hover right there. And now it's going crazy because the air is becoming turbulent. I could also tilt it a little bit. It still does the same thing. I know, trust me. This is like so cool. But when I tilt it too much, gravity wins eventually. Unless I had like another hair dryer. Yeah, now you've stalled and now the ball falls.
So if you lower the speed of the dryer, is it going to bring the ball down a little bit? Okay.
Just a little bit, but not enough. See, gravity's still one. So that's kind of like what we get into with stalls. And I only have the hot setting, so this ball is like gonna melt. This is like a little travel hair dryer, so it's not fancy or anything. So I just think that's the coolest thing ever. But so you're generating that fast moving air, lower pressure, allows the ball to lift up, but not quite as high because you still have the high pressure around it. I also read that you can do the same thing with a leaf blower and a beach ball. So I'm going to go buy a leaf blower and a beach ball.
Would it be able to be more stable if it go up higher if it's not hot? Or is it...
That's a good question. I wish I had a better blow dryer to test that out. I know, right? I would theorize yes. Like if you had cooler air, I might just go get a better blow dryer and just figure that one out for you. But I'll let you guys know. But yeah, I mean, so you have hotter air, which is less dense. And, you know, I'm not sure. I would imagine cooler air, it would go a little.
Like, would it be more stable? The
more Yeah.
Put it, like, so it would be less erratic.
Right.
You mean like there's less movement of the ball?
Yeah, kind of, because
it's more dense?
Yeah, because it's more dense and the air molecules aren't moving so fast. Yeah, they're a little bit more confined with cooler air than hotter air. So I would theorize, yeah, it'd be more stable. And then you'll notice also the ball was spinning. That's kind of where you had Newton's third law. There was an upward force being pushed on the ball and then a downward force, which causes the ball to spin.
Well, a leaf blower doesn't blow hot air.
No, it doesn't. So
it would be the same.
Yeah, it would. You would still get the whole spinning ball, but it might be more stable than like what you guys saw. But then again, and then you can tilt. I could tilt it because it was still just enough low pressure versus high pressure, but then eventually it just wasn't enough, and then the ball fell because that's when gravity won. Gravity beat out lift in that scenario. So when these forces are in equilibrium, you're in straight and level. When one gets bigger than the other, that's when you have different behaviors of the airplane. So like in a stall, for example, not generating enough lift for the amount of weight and gravity that's pulling on the plane as well. That's why the nose drops in a stall, because there's just not enough lift to be generated. So we'll kind of get into that. Did that all make sense though? Newton's third law, Bernoulli. Is there anything else I wanted to ask you about it? Could be. Yeah, I think of Bernoulli as a suction, like a vacuum, because that's what makes it make sense to me. You have the low pressure and the high pressure, which to me, I'm like, that didn't explain anything. But thinking of low pressure acting as a vacuum is kind of what made sense. Does that make sense?
No, that helped me.
Okay. It is explained differently depending on who you ask. Some people go into the more physics side because they're not physically inclined, but like inclined towards physics. I am not. So I am more inclined to like, what's an everyday way of saying this that makes sense to people? Vacuum. Okay, I can vibe with vacuum. The airplane's being sucked through the air for sure. And all of the forces that are acting on the wing are also acting on the propeller. So the airplane's being sucked forward through the air as the propeller's generating lift horizontally. And then you also have the equal opposite reaction as well, because the propeller generates air pushing backwards. Therefore, there is a forward motion of pushing. So these are relevant for both propeller and wing because they are both airfoils. Okay. Another difficult concept kind of to grasp is angle of attack. So the plane stalls when it exceeds the critical angle of attack. I want to emphasize that because that's a common question on check rides about stall aerodynamics. It's like, when does the plane stall? It can stall at any altitude, any attitude, so like any pitch setting, any power setting, any airspeed. Critical angle of attack will always stay the same. That's when the plane stalls. Is there a stall speed? Yes, but it changes based off of weight. So there's not necessarily the same stall speed for every situation. It also depends on if you have flaps in or not, or if you're in a bank or not. That's why stall speed's not listed on your airspeed indicator, because it just depends. But the critical angle of attack will remain the same. And I also want to emphasize the critical angle of attack is not the equivalent of your pitch. So if you're pitching up 10 degrees, that doesn't necessarily mean that your angle of attack is 10 degrees. We don't have an angle of attack indicator in either plane. Some planes do. Some planes have those installed, which are very useful for training because then you can actually see what angle of attack you're at and whether or not you're getting close to the stall, the critical angle of attack. These are just definitions. So chord line is just an imaginary line from the leading edge, the front of the wing, to the trailing edge, the back of the wing. Then the camber, that's the measure of the curvature of an airfoil. So in this case, we're talking about the wing. Relative wind is just the wind that's coming at you in the opposite direction. So it's always parallel opposite of whatever motion. So if we're moving forward, it's coming at us the other way. And then VA Your V speeds they all start with V. I believe V stands for velocity, and then I don't know why they chose A. I feel like someone told me and I can't remember. But VA means maneuvering speed. In short, maneuvering speed is the speed at which the plane will stall before it brakes. Which doesn't sound great, but I'd rather the plane stall and then recover from the stall versus like snapping off a wing. So when we're talking about angle of attack, you're always flying at a certain angle of attack for a given airspeed. So this is a straight and level. This is the relative wind. Here's your chord line. Your chord line and relative wind, the angle between those two is your angle of attack. This is a relatively low angle of attack because we're just in cruise. We're not climbing or descending. As you climb, you're increasing your angle of attack. Because as you increase angle of attack, you're also increasing lift. That's how we climb. And then as you're descending, opposite happens. Now you're decreasing your angle of attack according to the relative wind. It's also important to note you can stall in a negative angle of attack. Or I shouldn't say in a negative angle of attack. You can stall in a nosedive. People think, oh, just because I'm going faster because I'm descending, I'm not going to stall the plane. You absolutely can still stall the plane. If you're in a nosedive and you suddenly pull up, you're exceeding the critical angle of attack in that way because the relative airflow is down here. And now you're doing this. So you're going to exceed the critical angle of attack doing that as well. That's why we emphasize smooth motions of the plane, especially like when recovering from a stall or getting out of a spin. What is essential for lift to be generated is smooth airflow. As you start increasing that angle of attack by pulling back or even pushing forward, but we'll say pulling back because it's easier to picture. As you're increasing the angle of attack and you're lifting up the camber of the wing like this, the airflow has a harder time attaching itself to the wing, and eventually it separates and it becomes turbulent, just like in the picture. When the airflow becomes turbulent, you have a loss of lift. Still have lift, but not enough lift to counteract gravity. So that's when the nose dips down. The critical angle of attack, I don't know for sure. It's around 17 degrees, but to be safe, we say it's between 60 and 20 degrees of angle of attack. That's where the critical angle is. We don't know exactly for sure. We don't have an angle of attack indicator, so I couldn't tell you. Yeah, 16 to 20. This specific photo is saying 17. That's not a for sure number, but we do know it's somewhere between 16 and 20 degrees. Stephanie, I know angle of attack was something you wanted to go over. Was there something specific?
No, this is perfect.
Okay, cool. Anything else on this I wanted to say? A slower airspeed with a high angle of attack generates lift, just like a low angle of attack with a higher airspeed would. If you're going at a faster airspeed, you need a lower angle of attack to generate lift. If you're at a slower airspeed, you need more angle of attack to generate lift. Kind of same thing if you're heavier. If you have more weight in the plane, you need more power to generate the same amount of lift and a higher angle of attack. Then if you were a lighter aircraft, then you don't need so much power, you don't need such a high angle of attack to maintain lift. Because as you add more weight, you're adding more weight vector, so you need to also increase the lift vector. We do that by adding power, higher angle of attack. I say add power because if you just increase angle of attack, you have a slower airspeed, which could be fine until it's not. So that's why I say if you're going to do a higher angle of attack, add some power too, if you have more weight in the plane. So maneuvering speed is important because, again, it's the airspeed at which the plane's going to stall before it brakes. What I mean by that is I think the air maneuvering speed in the 150 is 109 miles per hour. So that's at max gross weight. Max gross weight, 109 miles per hour. If you're not at max gross weight, which you're probably not most of the time, that speed is lower. So maneuvering speed increases as weight increases and vice versa. Stall speed also increases as weight increases. Critical angle of attack stays the same. That does not change. So if your critical angle of attack is here, and you're a heavier aircraft, you're going to be flying at a higher angle of attack. And therefore, you can fly at 109 miles per hour. Let's say you're at max gross weight. You're at 109 miles per hour at this angle of attack. Your margin between your cruise angle of attack versus the critical angle of attack is not much. So you can go fast, pull back the yoke once, or push it forward all the way once, or turn it all the way left once, turn it all the way right once. You can't go boom, boom. You can only go one. You can make one abrupt control input, and the plane will stall before you break anything. Because you're not pulling it back that much. So you're not putting a whole bunch of G's on the airplane. So the plane's just going to be like, okay, I'm just going to stall. And it'll prevent you from doing that again. Whereas if you're at a lower weight and you're at a lower angle of attack, but let's say you're still trying to fly 109 as your maneuvering speed, you're flying at a lower angle of attack at 109 still, which is not proper because you should be at your maneuvering speed would be lower than 109 at this lower airspeed. Now you have a lot bigger of a margin to move the plane. You have a wider range to travel to hit critical angle of attack. Somewhere in here, because it's a lot farther, you might overstress the plane before it has a chance to stall. So something might break before it stalls because you have a lot more room to make that mistake. Does that make sense? Okay. So with a lower weight, your maneuvering speed is lower. So why you care? Don't be doing steep turns at 109 miles per hour if you're at 1,200 pounds in the plane, for example. You always want to be maneuvering at or below maneuvering speed. So with your CFI, you guys are probably closer to like 1,500 pounds. I forget, there is a formula, I'll look it up. There's like a rule of thumb that you could decrease the maneuvering speed by depending on what the weight is. There's a formula. I'll look it up and I'll send it to you guys. But I want to say, if you're doing steep turns at like 90 miles per hour, you're going to be fine when you're with a CFI. So that's safe. You're not going to overstress the plane and pull too many G's and break something off. You want the plane to stall before anything breaks off. There might be. Yeah, there might be in the POH. I don't know if this POH specifically, and there's another POH for a 172 that I fly that does have that. This one I don't know particularly, but it would be useful if it did. I want to say it might. Let me see. See if I can find it. Questions so far, though? Okay. Let me look at that really quick. Let's see. Maneuver, if you're doing chandelles, lazy 8, steep turns, they all say 109 miles per hour, which is 95 knots. There is also, it's page 25 for the Cessna. There's also a maximum load and minimum load factor for the plane. So for example, at max gross weight, 1,600 pounds, the flight maneuvering load factor without flaps, so flaps up, the max positive G's that you can pull is 4.4. We're not doing that. The negative is a negative 1.76. And then if you have flaps down, you can pull up 3.5. And then they don't list a negative, which I assume means that it's the same, negative 1.76. So, and it does say the design load factors are 150% of the above, and in all cases, the structure meets or exceeds design loads. So it could go more, but they're saying that the published max load factor is 4.4 because they don't want anyone doing anything stupid. I don't see like a range for the maneuvering speed, but there are, in newer POHs, there are. It'll be like 2,500 pounds, your maneuvering speed is 105. 2,200 pounds, your maneuvering speed is 100. And then it'll go down to usually just like 1,900 pounds. But in this one, because it's just a little old plane, they only do everything for max gross weight. And I think part of it is because when you're two people with full tanks, you're most likely almost there anyway. But I feel like most of the time when I do the weight and balance, even with full tanks, I'm close to like 1,500 pounds with students, so it's still a little bit lower. But it depends. Depends on who's with you. VS just means stall speed. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Okay. VA, maneuvering speed. VS, stall speed. Stall speed changes with flaps. So you have VS, but then you have VSO. So think of S as stuff, and SO, stuff out. V, stuff out, which means flaps are out. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I know that it's slower. You stall at a slower airspeed with flaps down. But when you throw banks in there, that increases your stall speed because now you're putting more force, more stress on the plane. It's not like anything's going to break, but you are putting more stress on the plane in a turn. So then your stall speed increases. You think of that added stress as an added force on the plane. Think of the added force as added weight on the plane. As what? Yeah. Like so if you're banking, you have a vertical component of lift that we were talking about. When you start turning, some of that vertical lift becomes horizontal lift. And for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. So now you have a horizontal component of lift. You also have another force called centrifugal force pulling you out of the turn. So all of those forces acting on the plane put stress on the plane. Think of it as added weight. That's why the stall speed increases in a turn. And in the POH, there is a little section for stall speeds. It'll say like 0 degrees of bank, 30 degrees of bank. If I'm with flaps up at 0 degrees of bank, the stalling speed is in miles per hour. It's 55. If I'm at 20 degrees of bank, flaps up, it becomes 57. At 40 degrees of bank with no flaps, it becomes 63. And then at 60 degrees of bank, you can stall at 78. So a faster stall speed is bad because that means you stall sooner than you normally would. But that being said, you can stall at any airspeed, any configuration, any altitude. Critical angle of attack stays the same. Good? Yes?
I was just curious for if it's the 17 you'll see more on like questions and stuff, or if it would still be 16 to 20.
I don't even know if you'll see a question asking you that. You'll definitely get a question like asking you, you'll get a question where the answer is critical angle of attack. Because it'll be like, when does the airplane stall? And it'll give you like, when you exceed this speed, or when you are in a 40-degree bank, when you exceed the critical angle of attack, that's the answer. They're not going to be like, how many degrees? They're probably going to ask you something about critical angle of attack, most likely. They might ask you something about how does a heavier aircraft, like how does that affect your stall speed? It would increase your stall speed. Let's say your stall speed is this at max gross weight, but you're at 1,400 pounds instead. What happens to your stall speed? Oh, okay, well, it'll decrease my stall speed. It'll be questions like that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I would say except for your CFI oral, because I was asked that. He was like, at what degree of angle of attack does it stall? And I was like, wow, no one's ever asked me that. I said 17. And he was like, oh, cool. Okay. So if you get your CFI, you might get asked that. I don't know. I was. It just took me off guard. Okay. Performance charts. How fun. Like I said earlier, when in doubt, you keep the numbers conservative. So we're going to play around with this. So let's look at McClellan's weather. So we're going to do McClellan because we're just going to use all the sea level columns. So this is your takeoff distance, maximum rate of climb, landing distance, and your cruise performance charts. It gives you really only one weight, max gross weight, 1,600 pounds. Remember, this was conducted by a test pilot in perfect conditions. She knew exactly what they were doing on a hard surface runway. You always want to look at the notes that are on the bottom of the charts because they'll tell you increase the distances 10% for every 35 degrees increase in temperature above standard, because all of these are standard temperatures for that altitude in degrees Fahrenheit. Sometimes it's in degrees Celsius. I will go over that in a minute. This is for your rate of climb. This is with flaps retracted, full throttle, and mixture leaned to smooth operation above 5,000 feet. So if you have flaps 10 and your mixture is not leaned and you're above 5,000 feet, these numbers, who knows? Fuel used, because you have a fuel burn column. Fuel used includes warm-up and takeoff allowances. So we say warm-up, you start the plane, you taxi, you do the run-up, and then you take off. That burns fuel. So it's including that allowance in there. For hot weather, decrease the rate of climb 15 feet per minute for every 10 degrees Fahrenheit above standard day temperature. So I will tell you right now, I don't think I've ever seen this plane fly 670 feet per minute in a climb. The max I've seen is 500, just with me. With a student, probably closer to 400. So you'll be calculating a lot of data once you get to the cross-country phase, and you have to calculate all of your legs, like where's my top of climb? I would not use 670 feet a minute. I would use 400 feet a minute when you're calculating that. Just keep that in mind for the future. Decrease the distances shown for your landing distance by 10% for every 4 knots of headwind. On the takeoff, they give you different headwind components. So if you have a 0 headwind, 10 knots of headwind, 20 knots of headwind, more headwind, the better. I always just default to the 0 headwind number because that's worst case scenario. Landing though, if you have, at least a 4-knot headwind, it's saying decrease the distances. Headwind is good. Operation on a dry, grassy runway, increase all of the distances by 20% of the total to clear 50-foot obstacle. And that's saying even for the ground roll. So the ground roll is just when the plane's rolling on the ground. Once it takes off, that's the end of the ground roll. They also include the total to clear a 50-foot obstacle. Basically, they're saying the plane will take off and climb 50 feet in 1,075 feet. Or up here, if you're, I'm sorry, that's for landing. If you're taking off, it'll take you 1,385 feet in theory to climb 50 feet. After takeoff, you can descend from 50 feet and touch the ground in 1,075 feet. In theory, this is all in theory. They're not taking into account your level of experience with the plane or how old the engine is. Cruise performance, depending on the altitude that you're at and the RPM setting that you're at. I'm not going to talk about brake horsepower because that's not something that you could see in the plane, so we're not going to worry about it. Your true airspeed miles per hour, it'll tell you how many gallons you're going to burn. Also just telling you like how long could you fly in theory. Like if I'm at 5,000 feet at 2,500 RPM, in theory, the plane will last for 4.7 hours. But that does not include the required fuel reserves that you have to have for daytime or nighttime. But they're saying you can fly 4.7 hours before the engine will quit. So you'll do a lot more of this in cross country, but you're also going to have to do this before you solo. So we're going to calculate takeoff distance at McClellan with the current weather conditions. So I'm going to look at that. So McClellan right now is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. The standard temperature for McClellan, because it's at sea level, would be 59 degrees Fahrenheit. As you get higher, I'm more used to doing it in Celsius. So the standard lapse rate, the degree at which the air cools down for every 1,000 feet, air gets cooler as you get higher. So standard at sea level is 15 degrees Celsius. 1,000 feet above sea level would be 13 degrees Celsius. 2,000 feet above sea level would be 11 degrees Celsius. Does that make sense? Air cools down 2 degrees Celsius every 1,000 feet you go. I believe it becomes like 4 degrees Fahrenheit if you're doing it in Fahrenheit. I just know like at Auburn, I think it equates to 52 degrees Fahrenheit standard. And then for McClellan, it'd be 59, we just say sea level, because 77 feet is just negligible. We'll say we're at 1,600 pounds, fine. We'll say 0 degrees of headwind at sea level, 86 degrees. So if we were at standard, it would be 735, right? But we're not at standard. I would just round up and say we're 35 degrees Fahrenheit above, just to add the 10% right on top of it. Because I think, let's see, we're 59. We're only like, what is that, 27 degrees Fahrenheit above? What is it? 17? Okay, see, don't ask me. I'm just going to do the 27. Okay. I was like, man, I was really off. Okay, so 27. So it's 27 degrees Fahrenheit above standard. I'm just going to say it's 35 and add the 10% because why not? That'll give me a bigger number. That way, if I take off earlier than that, I am pleasantly surprised. It's a great day. So we'll add 10% to 735, which would be like a little bit over 800 feet instead, because 10% of 735 is what, 73.5? I don't know, 815, 820? We'll say 820. So the ground run, 735. I added 10%. I'm going to say it's 820. So in theory, it'll take me 820 feet to take off ground run by adding the 10%. I didn't actually need to add the whole 10%, but we're going to because it's safer. That's why I'm keeping the number conservative. If you want to be real conservative, just go ahead and do the total to clear 50-foot obstacle, 1385, and then add 10% to that if you want to. That's like super conservative, but I'm not going to be mad at you for doing that. For these numbers, there's really no reason for you to be like on the dot accurate. I'd rather you overcompensate. I'd rather you think it's going to take you 820 feet to take off, but it only takes you 735 feet to take off. I'd rather you plan for the longer takeoff ground run or for the total to clear 50-foot obstacle. There's no 50-foot obstacles on the runway at McClellan, so you're not going to probably need to know that number. I like to teach, though, that over at McClellan, if you're going to take off and climb 50 feet, and let's say it takes 1385, let's add 10% to that. We'll say 1,500. It'll take you 1,500 to take off, climb 50 feet. Then you come down to the landing distance, 1,075. Let's increase, it says increase the distance by 10% for every 60 degrees Fahrenheit above. We're not 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but I'm going to add it anyway. So that would be add 10%, which would be 107. So call it 1,200. It'll take me 1,500 feet to climb 50 feet, 1,200 to land from 50 feet. So that is 3,700 feet total. So in using that number, how I apply it is that means I can take off out of McClellan, lose my engine at 50 feet, come back down and land safely, and still have plenty of runway left over because McClellan is like 10,600 feet. So I tell that to students, and then we practice it. I'm not saying that you have to do this with your C5, but it would be a good exercise when you're comfortable, only when you're comfortable. Like this is like stage 3 truck ride prep maneuver. What I do with students is I'm like, okay, I've done the math. It'll take me 3,700 feet to take off, climb 50 feet, lose an engine, come back down. No, this is different. No, we're not doing the turn. Yeah, this is just literally up and down. And this is in a situation where I am prepared to do it. So yeah, that number is more accurate. Obviously, if I'm taking off and I have an engine failure, I'm not expecting, you want to add a little buffer to that. I would say add 20% to that number to give you time for like that 5-second panic moment that you have. But in the maneuver, the simulated maneuver, I'll have them take off. We'll climb to roughly 50 feet, looking at the altimeter, looking at the GPS altitude. I'll pull the engine. and I'll be on the controls with the student, because the tendency, and I see it all the time, students want to pull back because you don't want to fall out of the sky. You need to push down. And I mean like push down until your butt lifts up out of the seat to get it down. So I'll do that with stage 3 private pilots just so that they know you can land back on the runway if you lose an engine at 50 feet. I can't tell you what that would be at 100 feet. I'd probably just double that number just to be safe. So if it's 3,700 feet, let's call it like 7,000 feet to do that. If I lose an engine at 100 feet, I could still come back down at McClellan and land and be fine on the runway.
It just
depends on the runway length, depends on how prepared you are, which obviously if we're doing it as a practice, we're very prepared. But again, if you're, not prepared for it, that is a huge factor to play, because there's a delay because you're not expecting it, and then you panic, and then you forget, like intuitively you want to pull back, but you have to push forward and fight that intuition of pulling. Did you have a question?
So with that, you would just get cleared beforehand, or like knowing you're practicing?
Yeah, like if you're at a tower airport, for sure. Tell tower you want to take off and then come back down and land on the runway again for a simulated engine failure. And then if you're at McClellan or like a non-towered airport, let them know because if you don't, they will be like, "Are you okay?" Yeah, don't do that. I thought I was at Lincoln. This taught me to like never do it without like saying we were gonna do it. I said we were gonna take off and then land straight ahead, but I didn't think anyone was there, so I didn't like go into detail. But I did it with a student. We came back down and there was like, "Aircraft on the runway at Lincoln, are you okay? Do you need assistance?" And I was like, no, it's fine, simulation. They were like, "Oh my God, okay, I've never seen that." So, but it was good. You know what? People are watching, people are looking out for you, which is great. But so now I'll be like, we're going to take off, do a simulated engine out, and land straight ahead back on the runway, and then taxi off. Never do this alone, obviously. Only do this with a CFI. It's really just to kill that instinct of pulling back. That's why we do it. It's also to give you a reason to use these numbers in kind of like an interesting hypothetical way. But that's how you would calculate takeoff at sea level. We said 86 degrees, 27 degrees Fahrenheit above. We'll say we just added the 10% anyway. If you were to do this for like Auburn, for example, which the elevation is 1,500 feet, that's not on the chart. But it's roughly in the middle of sea level and 2,500. So I would take ground run 735, ground run 910, add them together, divide them by 2, and use that number because that'll be like your middle ground. And then on top of that, you still have to add the 10% because it's probably hot over at Auburn as well. So that is a way it's called interpolating. And again, like there's a more precise way of doing it because 1,500 is not exactly in the center, but it's close enough to just do like the way I was doing it. You'll notice that the chart ends at 7,500 feet, aka anything above that, you're now a test pilot. There's no number for it. So if you're taking off out of Colorado in a 150, you have no idea what those numbers are. Because if you're in Colorado, the elevation is probably above 7,500 feet. It's closer to 10,000. So would you do it? No. Yep. And that note to increase the distance for temperature is extremely important. It's very rarely standard temperature here, anywhere. So you're probably always going to be increasing distances. If it's cooler, it'll take less of a distance. I would still just use whatever's on the chart. So if it's 735, but it's actually cooler at McClellan, it's probably not going to take 735. I'm still going to say 735, just to be safe. I just use the higher number. Same thing with the maximum rate of climb. 670 feet per minute on average if you're taking off from sea level. If you're taking off from 5,000 feet, notice your rate of climb is less. It's 440 because your engine's less efficient, your wings are less efficient, your propeller is less efficient. I'm just going to tell you, decrease, and this is just from an observed, how many times I've flown this plane, what I've observed its performance. And there's actually, on ForeFlight, you can add your performance data for your plane. And ForeFlight actually has a note saying that it's the pilot responsibility to correct these numbers for what's been observed. The observed performance versus the published performance. So again, 670, I have never observed that. So 400. 440 at 5,000 feet, unlikely. 200 feet per minute. Plane is old. If it's a hot day, if it's up high, she doesn't want to climb. She doesn't want to go. So you can just say a rule of thumb is deduct 200 feet per minute automatically from these numbers. I'm not getting that plane to 10,000 feet. It's just, maybe with me in the wintertime, it would do it. Maybe one of these days I will do that and just, confirm with all of you, hey, I made it to 10,000. Took me 30 minutes, but, it did it. And this is also assuming that you're holding this certain feet per minute the entire time, which is unlikely, even for me. So, or even for someone who's more experienced, it's very unlikely I'm holding exactly 400 feet the entire time. Things happen. You run into little bumps of turbulence. It affects your climb gradient. You get distracted. You're climbing faster. You're climbing slower than whatever's charted. So all of these numbers are based on like a very like far-fetched idea of perfection. Yeah, we're not doing that. So with my students, when I have them calculate the top of climb, there's a number of factors that go into it, but like let's say we're starting at McClellan, we're climbing to 5,500 feet. We're gonna take off from sea level at 400 feet per minute. At 5,000 feet, that rate of climb, I'm gonna say drops down to 200. So what you could do is you could take the average between sea level and 5,000 feet. So the average between 400 and 200 is 300, because that's right in the middle. So okay, I'm gonna say 5,500 feet at 300 feet a minute. That accounts for, you're not gonna be perfect and hold that altitude the entire time. Also, your rate of your performance is gonna decrease on the way to 5,000, not just at 5,000, it will decrease. So we're gonna say 300 to be safe and to be a little bit more accurate. So you need to climb 5,500 feet at 300 feet per minute. So every minute you're climbing another 300 feet. How many minutes is that? I'm asking because I don't know. Yes, yeah, 5,500 divided by 300. 18? Okay, we'll say 18. So your top of climb, you'll reach it in 18 minutes at this climb gradient on average. So when you're calculating like your top of climb leg, I mean like here's your airport, here's your takeoff point, and then here's your top of climb, TOC. There's your 555. This will take 18 minutes based off of your airspeed, your indicated airspeed of 73 miles per hour. So if you try to maintain 73 miles per hour the entire climb, 300 feet a minute, it should take you 18 minutes.
Do you usually just do average, or do you do it like when you do a range too? Because that's just
like a distance?
Well, because you were interviewing
Oh.
some of the numbers, like when you do a top, like a higher, lower, that range for them.
Sometimes. So like for example, so you have 18 minutes to get to 55. You could do one like right in the middle. So like, I don't know, 3,000 feet-ish. You can do another one for 3,000 feet. And then kind of just see what the range is for there. Like, okay, I should be at 3,000 feet in like, I don't know, what would it be, like 14 minutes? And then top climb's 18 minutes. So somewhere between 14 and 18. I tell students, whatever your top of climb is, add 2 minutes on top of that though. Because especially when you start doing cross countries, you're going to do something called flight following. We've kind of talked about it. ATC is going to hold your hand along the way. A lot of the time when people are doing flight following, whether you realize it or not, or you're meaning to or not, a lot of people level off. Because you're busy, you're talking to ATC, you're learning how to talk to ATC, so you just get distracted, and you're not holding 300 feet a minute, you're maybe climbing at 100 feet a minute, and so you add the 2 minutes just because that is probably more realistic. It's going to take you probably a little bit longer than what you planned for, just because now you're multitasking and you're throwing in another task. So if you got 18 minutes, I'll be like, okay, it'll take you 18 to 20 minutes to get there, realistically. Some students, because McClellan particularly is under a class Charlie, I have them level off at 1500, get a hold of NorCal, and then start their climb after they get radar contact from NorCal. So actually your top of climb, again, if you add the 2 to 3 minutes, depends on how long it takes for you to get a flight following. 2 minutes is average. If they're really busy, it could be 5 minutes. So you kind of have to think about it, bless you, based off of the day. So it could be like, you know what, today's been really busy. It might take you a long time to get a flight following. So go ahead and do your top of climb, but then add 5 minutes to it instead of 2 minutes. So those are just rules of thumb that kind of come from experience and just from what I've seen. And again, with McClellan, you have to level off at 1500, unless you can get a flight following like immediately, which is very unlikely. You're going to level up 1500, wait, get a hold of NorCal, get the flight following, get all the information, and then continue your climb. And so you can't say like, oh, it'll take me 18 minutes because I'll be climbing consistently, because you probably won't be. Yeah, so these are all the buffers. And these are not things that you're going to find in the POH. That's why we're going over them. Average fuel burn for this plane, I say 5 gallons. Because usually you guys will be climbing at around like 4,500, probably at the highest, just because anything above that takes way too long. If you're going over like mountainous terrain, yes, you're going to have to go higher. But like if you're going from here to Chico, you don't have to go that high. I would say 4,500 at the highest. And usually you'll be like around, it depends on the person. You could be around like 24, 2,500 RPM. I do 24 because anything else is just too slow. 2,400 RPM. It says 4.3 gallons per hour. I'm rounding up to 5. It's easier math. I'm being conservative, saying I'm burning more than I probably am. I'd rather do that. And also another way of looking at this is, so 12,500 is the highest this plane is going to climb. If you're at 2,400 RPM, oh wait, no, this isn't one of those tables. Never mind. Dang it. Okay. There's another table. It's called time, distance, and fuel, and it'll tell you like how long it'll take you to climb a certain amount and how much fuel it'll take for you to climb to that altitude. This is just telling you gallons per hour if you're cruising at this specific altitude. But I will tell you, on average, the 150 burns half a gallon for every 1,000 feet of climb. So what I have students do is, I know that the fuel used on the maximum rate, I know it says fuel used includes the warm-up and takeoff allowance. That's at a perfectly leaned mixture, which students just don't always do that. CFIs don't always do that. I know CFIs that taxi with the mixture all the way rich, and I'm like, what are you doing? Odds are you're going to forget something. So I go ahead and add 1.5 gallons for startup, taxi, takeoff. This is saying it's only going to do like 0.6 or 1.6 if you're climbing to 5,000 feet. I'm just, 1.5 is gone in my head. So you start with 22.5 usable, automatically deduct 1.5. That's what you're taking off with. And then for every 1,000 feet, I'm burning about 0.5 gallon. And this is very conservative because usually the number is actually closer to like 0.2 gallons, 0.3 gallons. I'm saying 0.5 gallon because mathematically it's just easier. And also I want to be overly cautious. So if I'm climbing to 4,500 feet, that's like 2.25 gallons I'll burn to get to the top of climb. So 2.25 Also subtract the 1.5 for the taxi takeoff. So 22.5 minus 1.5 and then minus 2.25, call it 2.5. 2.5, 1.5, that's 4. So 22 minus 4 is 18. Yeah, sounds right. The reason why I do that is so I know at my top of climb, I have 18 gallons left. I have more than that, but we're saying 18. We're going to be conservative. Top of climb, I have 18 gallons. I burn 5 gallons an hour. I actually burn 4.3. We're going to say 5. I will time when I reach my top of climb. I reach my top of climb at 5 o'clock p.m. In 1 hour, I'll have burned 5 gallons. So at 6 o'clock p.m., I will now have 13 gallons of fuel. That's how I do fuel burn.
Is that taking into account like the just in case fuel?
Oh, so the fuel reserve. So I'm just talking about like fuel burn per hour. Yeah. So, but the thing is, with fuel reserve, so VFR, you have to get from departure to destination plus 30 minutes at normal cruise. So you need an extra half hour of fuel in theory, daytime for VFR. At nighttime, you need an extra 45 minutes. Call it an hour. I'm not landing with half an hour of fuel. That's just insane. So I need to land at least with 5 gallons of fuel, is what I'm saying. So at 6 p.m. No, so I haven't gotten there yet. But top of climb, I have 18. In an hour, I'll have 13. If I have to fly another hour, I'll be 13 minus 5.
No.
8. I'll have 8 gallons. I'm comfortable with that. I'm not flying another hour, though, if that makes sense. So, because that would be 3 gallons of fuel, which is legal, but I don't, not me. It's outside of my minimum. I land with an hour of fuel at the minimum.
When you do this stuff, do you submit the flight plan to like somewhere else?
No, it's just for me. There's VFR flight plans, but we don't really use them anymore. And it's just because now we have flight following. So flight plan was great before flight following because somebody out there knew you were supposed to be somewhere at a certain time. If you do not land and call them within half an hour of your estimated time of arrival, because on your filed flight plan you say, hey, I'm going to get there at 6 p.m. If it's 6:30 and they have not gotten a call from you, they'll call you. They'll call the airport that you took off from. They'll call the airport you're supposed to land at. They'll call the air traffic control facilities on the way there. If they can't find anybody who knows where you are, they'll send out search and rescue because you're considered overdue. That whole process takes around 24 hours. So by then, if you actually did crash, somebody could die. Flight following is immediate. Flight following, they're with you the whole time. If you have an emergency, you can declare it to them and let them know, I am here, and they can also just see you where you are, and I'm going to land on a field that's right below me. I'm having an engine failure or whatever's happening. They can get to you a lot faster because they know exactly where you are. And they know the terms of your emergency. They'll ask you questions like how much fuel do you have on board, how many souls are on board. Yeah, they'll just ask you like the nature of your emergency. But so yeah, flight following is just more relevant now because technology. Flight plans were great back before we had flight following because at least someone knew you were supposed to be somewhere, and they'd eventually start looking for you. But yeah, that's why we don't really do them anymore.
So with that, do you still declare like mid-full intentions for it, or is it just?
Yeah.
As you know.
I would say yeah, you do. You don't have to give them as much information, so you have to give them, your tail number, the type of aircraft you are. So, 61329er, we're a Cessna 150. Say it everything individually. You can say Cessna 150, but it's more proper to say Cessna 150. Slant Golf, it's a code for saying we have a GPS. So you can say 150 Slant Golf. I just took off out of McClellan. I'm at 1,500 feet, and I'd like a flight following to Chico. And then they'll give you a squawk number, because that way that they know that, like, hey, you're in my system, and I'm talking to you. And then they'll say radar contact. 61329 radar contact, 3 miles northwest of McClellan. Say altitude. You'll say position checks. You're saying like, yep, that's me. And then I'm at 1,500, climbing 4,500. It means you're going to climb to 4,500. Don't say climbing to 4,500 because then you're saying 24500. You're not climbing to 24,500 feet. I guarantee it. They know that's not what you mean, but they could totally, like, if they wanted to be jerks about it, they could be like, oh, 24,500 feet, huh? 150, I've never seen that. So, use the proper terminology because you never know. You might be getting it. There are sassy air traffic controllers who will do that because they have nothing better to do if they're not busy. I know, right? Like, don't you have someone else to pick on? Also, let them know you're a student pilot. So there you go. Student pilot. Yeah, start with that. 61329er, student pilot. Then they have to be nice to you. Honestly, after I got my private pilot, I still use that sometimes. I was still like, yep, yeah, I'm a student. But I put 91103 up top because that's a regulation that tells you all the pre-flight actions you have to do, and takeoff and landing data is one of them.
This totally answers my question because I was wondering, because I noticed that on the fuel indicator, like, it's not always accurate to where the actual fuel level.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
And I was wondering, like, how do you know, like, where, so this, like, helps?
Yeah. So fun. Yeah. So, and again, so I've tested this numerous times with students, and I'm always over. I'd rather be over though than under. So I've always ended up with more fuel than I calculated, and that's exactly where I want to be. If I want to be super accurate, that's really just for like bragging rights. Be like, yeah, I did my fuel calculations within 0.2 of a gallon. Like, what can you do? I don't care about that. If I land with 10 extra gallons, fabulous. So I was planning for less. Fun fact, those fuel gauges do not have to be accurate unless they're empty. So always visually confirm your fuel on the pre-flight. Don't just be like, oh, the gauges say we're full. Don't do that.
Because that actually happened to me in my CFI. Because I went by what the fuel gauge was saying.
Yeah.
And then he asked me, like, I don't know, whatever. And then I was like,
Right. You're just like, well, it says we're fine.
And then when you go on check, it's like,
yeah, I never trust those.
That makes more sense why I've seen like a couple of the people that like run out of fuel.
It happens way too often because people are like, oh, my fuel gauges say I'm fine. Yeah, they don't have to be accurate unless you're empty, and by then it's too late. So.
Like, don't you do a fuel check? Because I know
with the straw.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The gauge.
Yes.
To see exactly how many gallons I had in each tank.
Yes.
And then be able to calculate how long I could fly with that.
Correct. That's how you should do it. That's how it should be done. Visually. Also, I had this problem with another student the other day. She bought her own fuel stick, which is great, fine. But well, you guys look at the fuel sticks next time. There are specific fuel sticks for those planes. There's one specific for the Piper Cherokee with and also the Piper Cherokee we have long range tanks. We have 25 gallons in each. Wait, no. Is it 25 each? Or is it? I can't remember. I think it's 25 each. It's 25 each. But there are other Cherokees that have less than 25. I think it's like 19 gallons each. We have bigger tanks. So there's a fuel dipstick specific for the Piper Cherokee with 25 gallons per side. There's another dipstick specific for the 19 gallon per side Piper Cherokee. For the 150, we have the normal tanks. There are long range tanks that you can put in a 150. The dipstick we have is for the 150, our 150. We have 11.2 or whatever gallons on each side. I had a student, she bought her own dipstick and she's been using it on both the 150 and the Piper. And I was like, no, not right. She's not my primary. I was just doing like a stage check. And why did I know that she had a different dipstick? Oh, because I found the dipstick in the plane and I was like, what are you using? She's like, oh, I just bought one. And I was like, cool. Can I see it? And I looked at it. She bought one for a 172. I'm like, girl, we're not flying a 172. And we definitely don't have 19 gallons per side. So the dipsticks are specific to the plane and the model and the amount in each side. So, pay attention to that.
And then a question, like after you fly, should you be like topping off
Not all the time.
every time?
No, like if you top off before you fly and then you go fly for like an hour or two, you don't need to top it off again.
But aren't you supposed to for condensation?
Um,
Or if you're the last one for that?
I'm not too worried about it in this area. It's one of the, so honestly, the reason why I say no is because Jet Center gets mad at us for constantly doing it. Yeah, they don't like
Even
it.
if we do it ourselves?
Oh, if you do it yourself, that's fine. Like go to the self-serve, you can do that.
Yeah.
If you want to use the card. Yes.
So like this is kind of like not on topic.
That's
but,
okay.
like, who is like paying for the gas? Like, cause I ordered like top offs before. Is that like they know it's
That's included in your rental.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So if you ever go to a self-serve though, that's why there's a credit card in the binder.
I've done it a couple of times.
Okay, good. Yeah. So you use the card. Don't use your own. If you ever use your own, like I don't know, if the card's not in there for a reason, keep the receipt because then it'll be deducted from your rental. Because your fuel, it's called it's a wet rental. Wet rental means it includes fuel and oil. So you're not paying separate for fuel. There's also dry rentals where you pay for the fuel, but you don't necessarily pay for the time. So if you're really good at leaning the mixture to where it doesn't burn a bunch of fuel, dry rentals are actually cheaper. I digress. So human factors, I put a reference in here, AIM Chapter 8, Section 1, Page 1, for the I'm Safe checklist. Remember I'm Safe? Okay, that's the pre-flight self-assessment you do. Illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, eating/emotion. 85% of general aviation accidents are caused by pilot error. So 85% of general aviation accidents do not have to happen. Human factors include like aeromedical, so like flight, physical health, psychological health, your stress levels, energy levels. Energy is a little bit lower with students in the summertime. Naturally, we're all human, CFIs too. Your general attitude and personality and level of self-awareness. There's something called hazardous attitudes that we'll get into. And then a certain confirmation bias. We kind of covered this, I think, in lesson 3. I don't know. Confirmation bias just means you're expecting something to happen the way it maybe always happens until it doesn't, but then you get complacent. So that video from last week about the pilot that he turned abruptly and he stalled and spun and crashed because he cut somebody off and the tower didn't catch it. He had the expectation bias that he was going to get cleared to land and do a short approach and just land. He didn't have the awareness to maybe I should clear both ways before I turn instead of just depending on tower to clear everything for me. So he had the confirmation bias of like, oh yeah, I'm cleared and no one's in my way and I'm not going to hit anything. So confirmation bias leads to complacency, which is never a place you want to be. So some human like aeromedical stuff would be hypoxia, and hypoxia is just an oxygen deficiency to the brain and other organs. There's 4 different types, and this is in AIM Chapter 8, Section 1, Page 2. There's hypoxic hypoxia. I will spell all of these. There's hypoxic hypoxia. There's histotoxic. There's hypemic. And then there's stagnant. These are all in general an oxygen deficiency in the body in some shape or form. And they impair, so hypoxia affects people differently. So some people get really giggly, get really like, I don't know, they just laugh and they think everything is funny. Some people start reacting really slowly to things, so they talk slow. Some people get sleepy and drowsy. Some people get headaches. You never really know until you experience hypoxia. And there's hypoxic chambers that you could go to where they will put you in a hypoxia situation, and then you can just see like how you react. You can also get an, oh, what's it called? The thing you put on your finger to check your oxygen level. Pulsometer. When I flew in the Grand Canyon with my boss, I think it's anything below 90 is considered hypoxic. So we were flying, I think, at like 11,500 feet, but we weren't going to be there for more than like 5 minutes. But just out of curiosity, you know, I kind of noticed like I was reacting really slow to a lot of things, and I was kind of getting a headache. So I put the what's it called? Pulse oximeter. I put the little thing on my finger because I carried one with me, and I was at 86. So I was considered hypoxic. So I kind of got a taste of like how I react to hypoxia. But hypoxia, that just happens when there's a lack of oxygen as a whole. So like if you're at a high altitude. Histotoxic is when you have oxygen-rich blood that flows normally, but your body can't use it. And that would be in the event of like if you had alcohol or drugs in your system. Hypemic hypoxia, you don't have enough red blood cells to carry the amount of oxygen that you need. That would be like if you're anemic, or if you have carbon monoxide poisoning, because your red blood cells absorb and carry carbon monoxide a lot easier than they carry oxygen. So if there's carbon monoxide, your blood cells will carry that, they won't carry oxygen. So you don't have enough red blood cells available to carry the oxygen. And then I said hypoxic, histotoxic, hypemic, stagnant. Stagnant is just when the blood's just not flowing. So you have enough oxygen, but your body's not able to move it. So that could happen, like, you know, when you're like your foot gets like all tingly, yeah, falls asleep, things like that. That's an example of stagnant hypoxia. This could happen if you're pulling too many G's, which probably is not going to happen in the 150. Or another one. Oh, if you have heart issues. So if you have heart-related issues, your body's just not able to move. The blood flow is just not flowing the way it should. And again, stagnant hypoxia, you're pulling too many G's. That's why people pass out.
What's the average altitude that people start getting symptoms?
Depends on the person. So in the regulations for required crew members, aka you're a pilot, if you're at 12,500 for more than 30 minutes, you have to have supplemental oxygen and be using it. That's because I guess on average, people are like, oh, you don't get hypoxia till 12,500 for a certain amount of time. But from what I've observed, a lot of people, and the FAA does say this, they're saying, but we recommend having supplemental oxygen if you're going at 10,000 feet. It's not mandatory, but it's just advised. So I would say most people experience hypoxia around 10,000 feet. At nighttime, though, FAA recommends having supplemental oxygen at 6,000 feet because your body's working harder at night to see. Also, you're probably tired because of circadian rhythm. So your body's not moving oxygen like it would like during the daytime when you were more aware. So 6,000 feet at nighttime, they recommend having supplemental oxygen. Not required though. It's still just the 12.5 after 30 minutes. That's required. But I would say 10,000 feet is when I start getting weary about it.
How long will it take your body to recover once you if you're starting to get hypoxia and you use the oxygen? How long will it take for you to recover?
Depends on the person. Like I'm thinking, you know, I think on average, as soon as like if you're at 12,000, and you discover you're hypoxic and you descend down to like 10,000 or 9,000, as long as that's enough for you, it shouldn't take you more than like 5 minutes to start picking back up again. Just depends on the person though. I know people that are avid skiers like all the time, so they're always up in Lake Tahoe. They're very used to the elevation, but they still get hypoxic at like 9,000 feet. They're pilots, so, and they know that about themselves. So even though there's somebody that's active and they're used to high elevation, that doesn't mean that you're gonna get hypoxic like later. It just depends on your body. I don't know if it has anything to do with like weight or anything like that. That's my limitation of knowledge. Disorientation, so if you just lose awareness, loss of spatial awareness. There's different types of disorientations. They're all in chapter 8 of the AIM, section 1, page 5. Different types of optical illusions. Yeah, optical illusions. Like one of them is called somatographic illusion. So this is more if you're flying in the clouds when you get your instrument rating. But if you're climbing in the clouds, it kind of feels like you're tumbling backwards. So that's called somatographic illusion. So that's an example. Disorientation most likely happens more so like if you accidentally enter the clouds. That's when you would really experience that. Just because now you have no visual reference to the horizon, so you might not know what is up and what is down. These are all things that can lead to accidents. Alcohol, drugs, the regulation with that is 9117. So I would write it down. I would open your book, highlight it, tab it, do something. So you're going to hear 8 hours bottle to throttle. It's not entirely true. There's different steps that you have to take to make sure you're legal if you've drank, for example, the night before. So you can't have a blood alcohol content of more than 0.04. And you also cannot perform required crew member duties within 8 hours of drinking. But let's say you drank and it's been 9 hours, but your blood alcohol content is 0.07. Still can't go. But not only can you not go, you cannot perform required crew member duties, which includes checking the weather, doing the weight and balance, route planning, pre-flighting. So as soon as you start doing one of those things, you're performing a required crew member duty. You can't do that if you're more than 0.04 or if you're within 8 hours. So I don't really like the 8-hour bottle to throttle because it's just not accurate. Hazardous attitudes. Okay, so there's 5 of them. We're all susceptible to all of them. There's anti-authority. I don't have to follow the rules. ATC can't tell me what to do. And then underneath is the antidote, is what the FAA calls it. It's like this antidote that is a statement. So anti-authority, follow the rules, they're probably right. Most of these regulations that are written are only written because there was an accident related to them. So the FAA had to step in and make a law that would hopefully prevent it. So that's why you do need to follow the rules, because someone else probably died for that rule to be written. If you've heard the phrase, the rules are written in blood, that's what it is. Another one is macho. I'm going to do it. I'll be fine. Taking chances is foolish. Mostly men deal with this one. But women are susceptible. We're all susceptible to all of them. Invulnerability. It could happen to you. Never think that it couldn't. It probably didn't happen to you several times before, but there's that bad decision chain that one video talked about. You were probably fine last time you did something dangerous. You'll probably be fine this time, but eventually it all catches up to you. Impulsivity. You think you have to do something so quickly. You think you have to make a decision fast. When you guys get into emergency procedures, engine failure specifically, the tendency at first is for students to react very quickly and to try to make decisions fast, try to choose a landing spot immediately, even though they don't realize that they chose like a rice field to land in, which is like you're probably not going to survive on that one. No, not so fast. Think first. Don't panic. Sit there. Literally. Like, just glide, fly the plane. The plane will glide. It will not fall out of the sky. Engine failures, you have a lot more time than you think you do. So think first, take a breath, and then continue, and then go for it. Resignation, and again, everybody's susceptible, but I mostly notice resignation with women, because you think that no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to help the situation. Promise that you can. I am not helpless. I can make a difference. That's why you're in flight training. all this, you go into emergency stuff. It's all about problem solving, troubleshooting. You might not solve the full problem, but you're at least troubleshooting it in a way where you'll survive whatever happens. So resignation, and impulsivity. When you choose a landing spot, for example, for your emergency, don't just choose the first thing that's there. If it's like a vineyard or a rice field or a corn field, those are not good spots. It could be take some extra time to find like something else. And if there's not a fantastic option, don't just be like, well, I would just die because there's no good options around here. Okay, let's just say in the unlikely event the rice paddy field is your only option, or if it's the best option, it's better than a cornfield. Okay, I'm going to be landing in water because rice fields are covered in water, and it's like grass, it's like wet, tall grass. Okay, I'm going to land on this rice paddy. How can I make this work? Treat it like a soft field landing, which you might not have gone into yet. But when you get into soft fields, you kind of, remember this moment. If I'm going to land on water, I'm going to treat it like a soft field. I'm basically going to hold the nose off as long as possible. I'm also going to be prepared for the fact that because it's a tricycle gear, we have a nose gear. When the nose gear does touch down, the plane's probably going to flip over. I'm going to have the door cracked open so that I can get out of the airplane. I'm not just going to sit back and, let the plane fall into the ground. You're going to fly the plane all the way to the crash site. You do whatever you can. If you're landing in a rice paddy field, fine. It's a soft field landing. Hold the nose off as long as possible. Open the door. Get ready to flip over. If you can, get something in front of you so you don't smack the panel. But you're not helpless. There's methods. There's things that you can do that will make it more survivable. Same thing if you have to land on water, which people do, and they survive. Plane doesn't, but who cares? Plane's probably the thing that failed. So, yeah.
I have a question on that topic. Since we're required to have insurance now, that's just on fault coverage, right? If there's like an accident, failure, or anything like that,
Correct.
the aircraft is separate.
Correct. That would be like Girls Love to Fly has like owner's insurance for the plane. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That's just if you do something out of negligence. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. CFIs have a separate type of insurance too. So we have our own insurance for as a renter and as a CFI. But yeah, I just want to emphasize we're all susceptible to all of these. But maybe, it depends on your personality. You're probably more likely to demonstrate one more than the other, or a couple of them more than the other. There's a test. If I can find the link, I'll send it to you guys. Just take it for fun. It's like a Myers-Briggs test. You can figure out like, ooh, which hazardous attitude am I? Like, I think mine was impulsivity and invulnerability. Those are my main two. And then they kind of, I think if I remember, it kind of tells you like what you feel, like each of them, like what level. So like you have your top one or top two, and then like you're more likely to, maybe you're less likely to be macho, but we're all vulnerable to all of these. So I'm not going to say like you're not going to demonstrate one of them ever. And it'll change as you get more experienced. So like you might not feel invulnerable now because you're new, but like when you get to 1,000 hours, you might become invulnerable because you're just like, nothing can happen to me. I've been fine this whole time. And it's like, no, it could. And then impulsivity. I think that's just like a personality thing. If you're naturally a person to make impulsive decisions, I don't know. If you're an adrenaline junkie, you might be like more attracted to that. But so you'll be familiar with all of these, be able to call yourself out. Your CFI will definitely call you out. And then basically anytime I am deciding on whether or not to make a flight, I think of two things. I think of would I send a student up there, and what would the NTSB report say? So if I go up and I crash, it's going to be because I made a stupid mistake, made a pilot error. I displayed a hazardous attitude, like invulnerability. So, and I think that's always really grounded me. Like, I could probably do it. Like, I could probably take off and be fine. But would I send a student up there? No. What would the NTSB report going to say? She was stupid. No, it's not going to say that. But she shouldn't have taken off that day. And I also think about like all the AOPA crash investigations. I think back to those videos and I'm like, oh shoot, that's exactly what that one guy did, and now he's dead. So you think about those, and those are very grounding. As a student, you're pretty limited to what you can do anyway, based off of your endorsements, for a good reason. But once you're a private pilot, you don't have those as many limitations anymore. So now you kind of have to be more self-aware and make decisions on your own, using your own methods. Like it could be like, would I take a loved one up here with me? Would my sister be comfortable with me going up? Probably not. Would my mom be okay with me going up? Probably not. Things like that. Whatever it takes to like talk yourself down. And you're going to hear this a lot, but it's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground. So try not to ever put yourself in that position, because it's very uncomfortable to wish you were on the ground when it's like unsafe. I think that's all I had. Cool. I'll send this PDF again to you guys. Those are 2 links to just some articles that I like for learning more about maneuvering speed and the 4 forces of flight. I'll just go more in depth to those topics, because there's definitely more to know with aerodynamics. We'll get a little bit more into them. I think towards the end of the ground school, we have like a maneuvers workshop. That's when I'll dive more into the aerodynamics of specific maneuvers. Like angle of attack is huge for stalls, so we'll get more into that stuff. But any questions? Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, since like it's starting to get hotter, is there a max temperature for operation?
There's like something called like a thermal index. I'll send it. I'm gonna make a note. I'm sending a lot of things. So I was gonna send.
I think it is in the manual that you're not supposed to fly under certain conditions. I thought I read it.
So for the aircraft, but I didn't know if there's a different one for just like.
There's a thermal index, and I don't know off the top of my head how to like break it down. I know it better by seeing it, but I would just say it's really like a personal thing. I personally will not go fly if it's above 105, because why? 100 I can manage. I'll be fine. But you might not be, and that's okay. You tell your CFI, do a ground session that day instead or something. So I wouldn't say there's really a maximum. Once the weather advisory starts saying like, what do they say when it's really hot? They say it's like, yeah, when they issue a heat warning, probably don't go. Like I would say that. Like if there's a heat warning, yeah, right. So there's 101.
I know.
Yeah, so there you go. I'm not flying Wednesday.
Yeah. Like it depends on the runways. Like I've been
for sure.
Oh
God.
So I
oh Lord, yeah, that's. Oof. I don't think I've ever seen it where like it got so hot where like McClellan was like, no one's taking off. So it kind of becomes a personal thing. Yeah, if there's a heat warning, I'm not doing anything that day. Not outside. It'll be ground. Yeah, it also kind of just depends on the day. Like if I'm already tired and it's 95, I still might not want to go. So know thyself. Yeah, just the plane doesn't want to go either. So it's like, is it really going to be enjoyable? Yeah.
What kind of like tips or tricks you have for like when you're flying VFR and you literally have to get every single thing and then do calculations or something like that at the same time?
Don't do anything in a turn. So I don't know, like when you would ever be turning, but like if you reach a checkpoint and you're turning to go back on route or start the next leg, don't be doing calculations as you're turning. Take a break in the turn, establish the turn, get straight and level. And then like in terms of doing, like if you're doing calculations while you're flying, trim it out, trim out the plane, make sure it's not descending or climbing at all. And then if you have like something on your knee board, take your hands off the yoke, literally, and do your calculation. Don't be holding onto the yoke and looking down, because you're probably going to be pushing down on the yoke. Some people, they're like, okay, I know I'm going to push down on the yoke, so in fact, I'll pull up, and then they do the opposite thing. Take your hand off the yoke. Your eyes should be 80% outside, 20% inside. So if you're doing calculations, take your time. Don't try to get your calculation done in 10 seconds. It might take a minute for you to finish all your calculations, because you should be looking down, write something, look up, check the instruments. Write something, look out, check the instruments, write the next thing. It should be, everything's done in increments, because you really should be looking outside majority of the time. So your calculations, however long it takes, if it takes you 5 minutes to fully complete them, fine, but you really should be looking outside. And always never look down for more than like 5 seconds. And again, take your hand off the yoke, please. Does that help? Okay. Good? Yeah.
That's just a general question. You're still able to operate for flight without having the GPS and stuff, right?
Correct.
It's just not all of it, like the updated stuff will be on there, right?
So if you don't have like the Sentry in there, is that what you're asking? So, yeah.
Yeah, so like for an iPad,
Uh-huh.
it just doesn't have the GPS in it.
Right.
So you just have
You still have GPS. So yeah, you still have ForeFlight. If you don't have GPS, you might not get the georeference. So like it won't follow your plane, so you won't know exactly where you're at. And like if you don't have the Sentry, you won't have like weather updates. You won't have traffic information, but you still have ForeFlight. You can still use the app as just like as a chart, for sure.
Does it still show other planes?
No, if you don't have. So if you have GPS, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll show the planes. You need the Sentry, that little white box that's in the plane, in order to connect to that to see other planes. Without it, you won't be able to. Unless like you're low enough and you have cellular data on the iPad, you still have service, then you might be able to. But I do not have cellular data, so I have to connect to the Sentry if I want to see other planes. Or yeah, you could do hotspot too. Some newer airplanes, they have it to where you could actually connect to the ADS-B of the plane through Bluetooth, and then use the traffic data from the ADS-B of the plane and portray it on ForeFlight. It's pretty nifty, or whatever app you're using. But yeah, so you probably just won't get the georeference like following you, which is like, you don't need it. Just nice to have.
I'm just trying to figure it out because it's like an extra $800 and I already have a
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Because I can use my phone too.
Exactly. Yeah, you can use your phone. So that's good. Yeah, you have your phone. Yeah, you still have the chart. Exactly. And it has it's like a nice little scratch pad too. Yeah. Cool. Well, I will send this to all of you along with other things I said I would send. Was it for July? I'm gonna say we're gonna cancel it, or at least extend by a week. I think most likely more people are gonna be out of town than not. Yeah, I'll send it a text, but I'm just gonna say let's nix the July 6th day and just extend it. So instead of ending on July 15th, we'll end on the week after that. Yeah. All right, y'all. Thanks for listening to me talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.